Good morning. I'm Steve Runyon, and I'm your Sunday associate today. I apologize for the lack of a name badge. I keep forgetting to call to get a new one. I don't know where it went. Welcome to the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, where we covenant to weave together the strands of our separate lives into the fabric of a community. We are an inclusive, welcoming congregation. Wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. We adhere to the principles of Unitarian Universalism, which you can find on the newcomer card placed on the back of each chair in the sanctuary and at the welcome table in the Great Hall. Please feel free to take a card with you. This is a great time to silence any noise-making devices as we prepare for our morning worship. And now, in the spirit of hospitality, I invite you to greet somebody you did or did not come with.
I am Joel Miller. I'm the interim minister here at the Morristown Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So pleased to welcome you. There are so many things that go on here through the week and that are happening here as we move into the holiday season. Some highlights this afternoon at 1 p.m. we have a memorial service for Judy Oler. You can join us in the meeting room or on Zoom. And yes.
1 or 2 o'clock?
1 o'clock.
Really?
1 o'clock.
Because there are loads of notices that have gone out that said it was 2. No, it's 1.
1 o'clock. So maybe we'll send an extra note here. A giving tree is going to be set up in the Great Hall this week. Please take a tag and return the gift by December 9th. This will benefit the Morris County Correctional Facility Chaplaincy Program. And the annual Gifts and Giving Fair will be on Sunday, December 4th from 10 until 2. Come shop for gifts while learning about social justice work. And the Odyssey Project will feature Allison Chase Sunday, December 4th at 12:45 p.m. So you could come, be part of the Odyssey, and enjoy the annual Gifts and Giving Fair at the same time. So many years ago, I was invited to speak at an interfaith Thanksgiving service, and I was one of 2 speakers invited to give an opening blessing. And in addition to myself, the other speaker was a Seneca elder. Now, this was in Buffalo, New York, and the Seneca people are the American Indians, or the sometimes they say Native Americans who live in that area right now. And this Seneca elder asked if she could go first, and I thought, well, of course, why not? And so she began her blessing. She first gave thanks for the gathered people, and she did it first in her native language, Onondaga, and then she said it in English. Then she thanked the Earth Mothers in Onondaga, then in English. Then she thanked the fish. Then in both languages. And mind you, she thanked each of these thoroughly. She thanked the plants, the food plants, the medicine plants, the animals, the trees, the birds, the 4 winds, the thunders, the sun, the grandmother moon, the stars, the wisdom keepers, the creator. This blessing took half an hour. A lot of people were getting very nervous. How long was this service going to last? I could see it in their faces. They didn't realize we had just gone into Indian time, and I mean that with respect. We were on white people time, and we were thinking, this is an hour, right? Got our watches on. I was the next to speak. I had a couple of pages I thought it was going to be about maybe 3-4 minutes. When I got to the microphone, I just said, we are blessing ourselves and each other by being here. Let us be thankful for all our blessings and the blessings we have just heard. And I sat down, and I saw a couple of folks put their hands up like, thank you. Thankfully, they didn't clap. If I had that to do over again, though, because I got some comments afterward, thank you for being so brief. I didn't quite understand that what we had just heard was actually a gift of the Seneca people. And we had just heard the Thanksgiving address, which is something that the Seneca people, in fact, the Haudenosaunee people, they're part of a nation of, a confederacy, actually, of 6 nations, 6 Indian nations up in upstate New York. And I learned that especially for giving thanks, when you're in Indian time, you give it the time it takes. So I began thinking about this service and gratitude, giving thanks. And I thought this might be the most appropriate thing to do this morning. The American Indian people who first lived on this land were the Lenape people. And on special occasions, they ask us to say these words when we celebrate, if we are remembering them. The land upon which we gather is part of the traditional territory of the Lenape, called Lenapehoking. The Lenape people lived in harmony with one another upon these lands for thousands of years. During the colonial era and the early federal period, many were removed west and north, but some also remain among the continuing historical tribal communities of this region. The Nanticoke Lenni Lenape Tribal Nation, the Ramapo Lenape Nation, and the Powhatan Lenape Nation, the Nanticoke of Millsboro, Delaware, and the Lenape of Cheswold, Delaware. We acknowledge the Lenni Lenape as the original people of this land and their continuing relationship with their territory. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of the Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief, Tamanend, that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land. Harmony as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun and moon and stars shine. We give thanks for our welcome to this land and that we have the honor of sharing it with each other. Good morning and welcome. I have 2 chalice lighters this morning. You guys want to come up now and help me light the chalice? Iris and Sadie.
As we light our chalice, we say together, love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And our hymn is number 1010.
And at this time now, our children recess to their classes. We are so glad you have been here with us. You're always welcome to stay if you would like. And if you would like to go to your class, our Director of Religious Education, Nick Walwork, is right there. He can help you get to your classes. Spirit of love. We have a special announcement from Sandra Persichetti.
Not really an announcement, but a little bit of a testimonial. For those who don't know me, I'm Sandra Persichetti. As many of you know, I'm relatively new to Morristown. After retiring, living in Princeton for over 30 years, I moved here in 2013 to be closer to my grandchildren and their parents. Moving to a new community at a certain age is not always easy, especially if you're no longer working. So I threw myself into volunteering at the then Soup Kitchen, now Nourish NJ, and the League of Women Voters. At both places, I met interesting people, some of whom are members here. Coupled with the time spent with my grandchildren and visits with friends from Princeton, retirement was quite happy. Then came the election of 2016, the most unexpected presidency of my lifetime, throwing me into a worry mode for the future of my grandchildren and the country. In January of 2017, I attended the annual Martin Luther King breakfast at the Hyatt, as I did each year since moving here. Allison Miller was the keynote speaker. Her words of compassion and equity for all people, regardless of background, and her commitment to community service hit home. I felt she was talking directly to me. The next week, I attended my first ever Unitarian Sunday service. I will never forget being greeted by Joe Urhane, who took me under his wing and sat with me throughout the service. When it came time for the offertory and I reached into my wallet, Joe said it was not necessary to contribute since this was my first time attending. I responded that by having been raised Catholic, there was no way I could not put something in the collection plate. After attending services all of February and being moved and calmed by Allison's sermons, I signed the book and became a member of the Morristown UU Fellowship in March of that year. Sunday services at the fellowship keep me centered. The sermons always reflect on current and relevant issues. The principles allow me to live my values guilt-free as they relate to equity and dignity for every person. Here I feel blessed to be surrounded by a like-minded people trying to make our community and the world a better place. Susan Oxman soon reached out to me to invite me to a neighborhood group where I met some of the most amazing women and men in the fellowship. Thanks to Susan's efforts, this group meets a few times a year. I felt so welcomed as a newcomer at the first lunch, and I'm happy to count many of the members as friends. To quote Rita Morris when she spoke in honor of Sharon Glickman, "You know who you are." Thank you for including me into the group. At the time I arrived at the fellowship, the Gateways Task Force was deep into finalizing plans for capital improvements, including the parking lot, landscaping, the detention basin, and the addition, all in keeping with the zoning board resolution approving the project. This was deja vu for me, since while executive director of Princeton Community Housing, a nonprofit affordable housing owner, we had gone through the time and expense of a neighborhood lawsuit in order to build HUD-financed senior housing. Fortunately, in both cases, the good guys won. So I joined the highly qualified and effective Gateways team. Learning about the reasons for the addition and the years of discussion by and with all of you for the capital improvements to the property, I made a contribution to the Deeper Roots, Wider Wings campaign in 2018, then added to it in 2020, in 2021, and again this year. Being on the task force allows me to witness firsthand how each member is acutely aware that we are using OPM, other people's money. Much of our time is spent working with our architect and engineer to develop cost-effective plans, and we individually research both large and small details of those plans. At the time of bidding, we ask for multiple contractors to submit bids and work with a small number of them on value engineering. The end cost is ever in the minds of the task force. That commitment to quality at a competitive price is what encourages me to continue to make contributions to the campaign. Doing so directly with my IRA distribution at the end of the year is easy and tax-free. Having just bumped buns in the terrace room and a narrow walkway between tables while bidding on various items for the auction, I couldn't help thinking how nice it will be in the new addition to have more space to spread out. The Deeper Roots, Wider Wings campaign members have done an incredible job raising the needed funds to make this happen. We are so close to meeting the goal, but because of COVID, it has become a moving target. Any contribution, big or small, is welcome. It would be great to have 100% participation from our membership. Rest assured that the Gateways Task Force will do everything possible to manage the costs of this capital improvement, and we hope you will do everything you can to help us reach our goals. Thank you.
I'm grateful for this community, your presence in the world, for each other, the difference you make in each other's lives. You've told me about that. You just heard from Sandra about the difference you make. Yet at this moment, every Sunday, we come together to share milestones, passages. And even though many of them won't be shared aloud, it is this ritual of sharing that reminds us how deeply we become connected with one another in community. And how important the light of this place, this beacon of hope, of compassion, of possibility, of freedom, is, how important this is, how the world longs for it. Your light in this community, vivid for people from the first day your first member signed your membership book, to these moments when you sign checks or push buttons on accounts to send money to a capital campaign, to expand your ministry to make a difference in the world. Your light matters, and always matters more than any of us knows. Some Sundays we light a candle because of an especially important passage or milestone. I thought this morning I would be lighting it for just this day, which is known as the Transgender Day of Remembrance. Many people who are transgender experience a great deal of threat of violence, and a great many transgender people all over this planet often are killed for their public expression of who they are or who they are becoming. This morning, I bring an especial sadness to the lighting of this candle and an especial joy that you are here, because the sadness is that there was a shooting at a lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, queer club, Q, in Denver, a place that I have been before, with people I care for and love. And I think about your children and mine who might give their lives just to freely be who they are. May the power and love of this place continue to emanate out into the world, so that the day may come when no one fears for their lives because of who they are, how they love, the language they speak, the clothes they choose to wear. You held me, and there were no words, and there was no time, and you held me. There was only wanting and being held and being filled with wanting, and I was nothing but letting go, and there were no words, and there needed to be no words. And the terror left, leaving stillness. And there was a presence, and it was tough and warm. And there was darkness and no time and no words, and we flowed. And in the darkness and in the being held, I was not lost. You held me. The world was dark and warm, without time, without words, and you held me. I do love this hymn. We sang a version of it in public school, though we probably shouldn't have. And we sang a version of it at Unitarian Universalist Sunday School. And although we never talked about the fact that Unitarians were pilgrims at the time, I loved that we sang it, and I had this one childhood connection to that heritage. So this is, if you like the book, look in the gray hymn books, it's number 67. The words will be here on the screen. I invite you to sing and stand or in body or in spirit. We sing now together. we sang that once at a Thanksgiving a Sunday service before Thanksgiving some years ago, and some folks were visiting, and they said, "You Unitarians are always changing the words to things." I was nice. I didn't say, "Well, you know, we are the Pilgrims. We get to change those words if we want." This is a reading. It's a poem by Joy Harjo. I just love the poetry by Joy Harjo. She was the 23rd Poet Laureate of the United States. To this time, the only Poet Laureate to have served 3 terms. She is a member of the Muskogee Nation of American Indians, which currently live in Oklahoma. The title of this poem is "Perhaps the World Ends Here." The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies teethe at the corners. They scrape their knees underneath it. It's here that children are given instructions on what it means to be human. We make men at the table, we make women at it. At this table we gossip, recall enemies and the ghosts of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor falling down selves, and as we put ourselves back together once again at the table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It's a place to hide in the shadow of terror. It's a place to celebrate a terrible victory. We have given birth on this table, and we prepared our parents for burial on this table. At this table, we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite.
As always, our offering today will be split 50-50, today with the Interfaith Food Pantry. The Food Pantry is neighbors helping neighbors, committed to ending hunger and supporting self-sufficiency. There are instructions in your order of service for how to donate via text or online, or you can drop it in the basket now.
hard to believe that it's been over 30 years for me since I was in theological school. Young guy just having left Ohio and gone to California to study at the Thomas Starr King Theological School, one of our theological schools. This one out in Berkeley, California. And one of the wonderful things about being out there was it was part of this large consortium of all kinds of different organizations. There were Catholic seminaries. I would have classes with seminarians working on becoming priests, with Lutherans, with Methodists, with Congregationalists, and there was a Center for Buddhist Learning, and there were a group of Mormons there, and there was a Jewish Institute for Study. It was an amazing, rich place, right next to the University of California at Berkeley, and right up on a hill that overlooked the UC campus. And in fact, people in Berkeley call that place Holy Hill, because there's all these holy people up there, apparently. There was one semester that I had this class on world religions, and it was just filled with so much amazing diversity. And we would go out to lunch afterward, and because we would get so excited about learning how each of us was experiencing this class and learning about religions of the world. And I always liked, I love salad. I loved salad even back then. I would always see if I could order the salad. And I kind of liked the salad because on the train that I would take up to Berkeley from the apartment where I lived at the time, I would pass these fields. There were still some fields in the San Francisco Bay Area where there were workers that would go out in the morning and where they would harvest lettuce. You could see them harvesting the lettuce from the train as I took it up the east side of the Bay Area to my classes. They worked hard, those people. They were there early in the morning, and they worked late into the day. They were Spanish-speaking folks, probably from Mexico. One day I was ready to dig into my salad and eager. I guess I'll say it. I'm pretty much a white guy, right? And I'm ready to go into that salad, and there was this really lovely Muslim man sitting across from me. He said, "Aren't you going to give thanks for the food first?" "Oh, yeah, I guess we should do that, shouldn't we?" And so he said, "Well, would you like to give the prayer?" And he was kind to offer and to give me the opportunity to practice my giving gratitude before a meal. And so I gave my prayer of thanks for my classmates. And as I was about to finish, the Muslim man added, and we keep in our thoughts those field workers whose hands fed us, now feed us, but some of whom died this morning when the pickup truck they were riding in overturned on the freeway. I'd been watching those folks for some time. And I didn't know their names and had never actually met them, but I was still heartbroken, and I was embarrassed. I'd actually seen the article. And it didn't click in. And here I was with these beloved classmates, and I said to them, "I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe that I did that. I don't feel like I deserve to eat the food." And the wonderful thing about this collection of people, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, people from every continent on the earth, from cultures some of us may never have heard of, and they resoundingly said, "Give thanks for the food, and give thanks for those people. Even if they gave their lives so that you could eat. They wouldn't want you not to give thanks, and they wouldn't want you to leave the food to spoil. Eat it, enjoy it." So for me, that was a huge change, a huge shift in my experience of understanding the importance of gratitude. Understanding the interconnected web of life, yes, it's one thing to do it in theory, but it's another thing to understand that I'm alive because of it, and that others sacrifice for my well-being. And sometimes I sacrifice for them too. So lately, there have been a lot of conversations among Unitarian Universalist ministers about Thanksgiving. I have some Unitarian Universalist colleagues, ministerial colleagues, who believe we should not even celebrate Thanksgiving anymore. There was an article in the Washington Post that I saw some years ago, and I was delighted to see it because it talked about how there's a lot of debate about Thanksgiving these days, especially among Unitarian Universalists who probably have the deepest connections to Thanksgiving of any group in the United States. And indeed we do. We are literally the pilgrims. If you go to Plymouth, Massachusetts, and you look in the town square, there on the top of the hill that oversees the square is an old church building built by the Pilgrim congregation, and the name of it is First Parish of Plymouth, Unitarian Universalist. And there are a lot of, in the southern part of Massachusetts, there are a lot of congregations that are First Parish of, Unitarian Universalist that are connected to the Pilgrims. How many of you, when you grew up went to like a public school, did you make those little hats with the paper hats with the little buckles on them, or if you were female identified, you had one of those funny white bib things on your shoulders? I did that. I'm old enough to have done that. I don't know. I hear some schools still do it, some don't. One little note, since we are literally the Pilgrims, there are other people who can also claim to be Pilgrims, but we're the Pilgrims. We are also the Puritans. Please don't confuse the two. The Puritans disliked the Pilgrims a great deal because they weren't orthodox enough. And the Pilgrims were trying to escape people like the Puritans. The Puritans eventually, they didn't quite, they pretty much invaded. The Puritans of Boston eventually invaded Plymouth and said, yeah, you're one of us now. One historian pointed out, yeah, they kind of swallowed them, but who got digested seemed to be more the Puritans than the Pilgrims. And the reason the historian said that is, well, look at them. They're all Unitarians now. The thing about the things we learned when in school about how the Pilgrims were seeking religious freedom, they arrived at a place we now call Plymouth Rock. And that particular myth has them meeting a guy named Squanto who teaches them how to plant and find food, and they survive a very difficult first winter. True, to a certain extent, just leaves out other parts of the story. The Pilgrims actually had a charter to go to Virginia, and they got lost because they did not want to go to Virginia and have to do the whole same thing again. So they were trying to find a place they could go, land that they could just take. And when they arrived at this place we now think of as Plymouth Rock, there was literally a rock there. You can actually see it. There's a little temple over the top of it. The rock's much smaller, though. People keep knocking pieces off because they want souvenirs of the Plymouth Rock. The thing that they don't tell you is that when they arrived there, there had been people living there, and Squanto was there, but one of the things that had happened is Squanto's people had all died from smallpox. Smallpox had made its way across the continent. 95% of the people who lived on this continent before Europeans arrived died from smallpox. Huge, huge tragedy for the peoples who lived here. So Squanto had actually been captured by some explorers, European explorers. He'd been captured and put on display as a curiosity, and then he made his way back, and then he'd been captured again and enslaved and made his way back. He was quite fluent in a lot of languages. He was being helpful, but he was a little wary of the Pilgrims, as were most of the Indians. What were these people going to come? What were they going to do? The relationship didn't go especially well. And so 40 years later, by the time that the children and grandchildren of the Pilgrims were starting new villages, they were also at war with the people who lived there, the Wampanoag people who had lived in other villages in the area, in addition to the village that had died, the one Squanto came from. And they went to war, and the Pilgrims and the Puritans and some of my own ancestors from Connecticut either pushed the Wampanoag and the Patuxet and the other people that lived in New England. They pushed them off the land, they killed them, or they enslaved them. It's actually it's an even harder history to tell than that, but I think that's enough at the moment. But that's thus the reason that my colleagues and I are in this debate. Some of my colleagues saying, we need to get rid of Thanksgiving. It's got a history. It can't be redeemed. I remember the first time I heard that, I thought, wow, should we really do that? I mean, I love Thanksgiving. I don't know about you. It's not easy for all of us. There's always the complications of family. I know some people, because of the complications of family, would say, I'd love it if you canceled Thanksgiving. I guess I consider myself fortunate that I have such wonderful memories of Thanksgiving and look forward to being with family. And I look forward to the spiritual practice of giving thanks. It takes me back to that lunch with classmates from cultures all over the world and religions of all kinds. Be thankful. Practice gratitude. I'm ready to give up the myth of Thanksgiving. I could give that part up very easily. It was wrong to begin with. As we know, as I just mentioned, dressing up in Puritan outfits, pretending to be pilgrims. Yeah, the pilgrims would have been actually pretty offended by that. But I don't think we should do away with Thanksgiving. And there's several reasons, I think, for that. One of them is I think Thanksgiving has enough power that if we can somehow reappropriate it, rethink it, so that it's a day that, like this congregation, reaches out in such a broad, welcoming way, that we can keep what is strong about it, and that we can undermine the myth that was written about it. Actually, the history of Thanksgiving is not especially complicated. The Pilgrims didn't really have a Thanksgiving that looked like anything that we do. The Thanksgiving that we have was actually a creation of a Unitarian woman who convinced Abraham Lincoln in 1863, we need a national day of Thanksgiving. It'll be something that unites us across all of our differences. And indeed, that's how Thanksgiving was put together. But they had to kind of put it together with the myth of this way in which the Pilgrims arrived searching for freedom, and the Wampanoag people said, here you go, you can take the land, we don't need it. And the Wampanoag begged to differ. In fact, about 40 years ago, there was an interfaith Thanksgiving service, and they invited the chief of the Wampanoag to speak, but when he was polite and shared his manuscript with them, and when they saw it, they said, no, we don't want you to speak, because he was going to retell the true story instead of the myth story. But I think it's good to give up the myth story, keep Thanksgiving. What would we replace it with? We would replace, some of my colleagues have suggested we have a day of repentance for it. I like the idea of a day of repentance, but not in place of a day of gratitude. Just having a day of repentance kind of reminds me of one of those traditions where you're supposed to flagellate yourself. There's some religions that have one of those where you're supposed to, self-abnegation is the spiritual practice. Isn't it Audre Lorde who said you cannot take apart the master's house with the master's tools? I think getting rid of Thanksgiving and leaving an empty spot does exactly what the myth of Thanksgiving was trying to do, to erase something. Many American Indians have abandoned Thanksgiving, but others continue to celebrate it. And actually think we ought to continue to celebrate it as well, with the truth of its background. Sean Sherman is an Ogallala Lakota Sioux, and his love of food led him to become a chef. His people's heritage led him to open a restaurant that cooks only local produce. He'd grown up eating food that looks a lot like what we eat at Thanksgiving, except that the regular meals would be made up of something like fry bread. I don't know if some of you are nodding about fry bread. Fry bread is considered like a traditional Indian food. Actually, fry bread was something that Indians made because they'd been forced off their land, and the only food they had access to was from the federal government, which gave them some surplus flour and some surplus lard and said, yeah, good luck. Fry bread was what they could make and survive with. Chef Sean Sherman realized that the land around us is filled with food that we don't even know is food, that our ancestors his ancestors used to eat all the time, and indeed some of our ancestors may have eaten. He points out, in fact, that let's reappropriate Thanksgiving. He writes the traditional recipes of Thanksgiving all come from indigenous food. Turkey, corn, beans, pumpkin, maple, wild rice. That's all American Indian food. He believes there's no need to make Thanksgiving about a false past. He says, it is so much better when it celebrates the beauty of the present. And who better to take on reappropriating Thanksgiving for the beauty of the present than a group of actual pilgrims like ourselves? We can rewrite the hymn. Let's redo Thanksgiving. And one of the things about pilgrims is that I think if one of the original pilgrim theologians was here, they would say, well, yeah, you can be pilgrims, but everybody should be a pilgrim. And that's one of the things I like about our heritage is we can be capital P pilgrims, but that doesn't mean that somebody who isn't a capital P pilgrim isn't a pilgrim. They still are. And in reappropriating it, shift the day to what is most beautiful, most enduring, most interconnecting. I was in the grocery store checkout a couple of years ago. It was just before Thanksgiving. The woman being checked out right in front of me had dropped her SNAP card on the ground next to me. And there was a fellow waiting behind me, and she picked her card up. SNAP card, by the way, is it's what we used to call them food stamps, but it's all electronic now. And she had government assistance so that she could buy food. In this particular case, she was buying it right before Thanksgiving. The guy behind me was rather impatient, and he saw her pick up the SNAP card. And he started commenting on her grocery purchases and saying things like, and I'm helping pay for that. I turned to the guy and looked at him and I said, come on, man, be kind. Thankfully, I stopped myself there, judging the woman for her need, wanting her to be joyless at Thanksgiving. That's the old myth. That's the stuff I think we need to get away from. What I wanted to say to the guy next was, man, you are like a Dementor. It's if you haven't read it, it's like the Harry Potter books. There's these creatures that suck all the joy out of life, and you die joyless and shriveled. Thankfully, I did not call him a Dementor. It might have felt good in the moment, but it would have been mean, an ugly joy, not very much in the Thanksgiving spirit. In some ways, I was really able to let go of what Thanksgiving was supposed to be and let it become what it's becoming. It was about, I think it was about 10 years ago. I was, one of the last years I was living in Buffalo, New York, and my children and their mom and I lived together in this house. It was an old Victorian house in Buffalo, New York, and we were fixing it up, and we'd never really gotten the dining room fully fixed. So every Thanksgiving, we had eaten at the kitchen table rather than in the dining room. And we'd pull some of the nice china and stuff out, but it really wouldn't all fit on the kitchen table. So we had finally finished the dining room. We'd finally gotten that hole in the ceiling patched and opened it up. And I thought, Thanksgiving, I'm going to get all of the good stuff out, the nice china, the glasses. We started pulling stuff out and setting the table. We had some great candlesticks. There was this great tablecloth that my kid's mom had gotten years before. It had these really great harvest colors from like the late 60s. It was really vivid and really kind of a cool tablecloth. And I bought all the fixings for Thanksgiving. I did the cooking, so I was at home at the time, and so I cooked up a big turkey dinner with all the fixings and the cornbread and the potatoes and green bean salad and the cranberry relish and pumpkin pie, all of it. And I bought candles along with it, some really lovely beeswax candles. I hadn't put candles on a table in years. I was so excited. I was just pulling the turkey out of the oven to kind of let it set for a minute and get ready to do some carving. The table was almost ready, and I lit the candles. Went back in to finish setting everything up and carry it out to the table. I was doing some carving of the turkey, and I heard my son from the living room say, "Oh my God, fire!" And I was like, "What?" And then I turned and looked toward the dining room, and I could see the reflection of an orange glow on the wall in the dining room from the kitchen. And I thought, "Oh my God." And I ran into the dining room. So here's what had happened. Not having bought hand-dipped candles, the wicks were really long. And you're supposed to trim the wick before you light the darn candle, if it's a handmade candle. So what happened was, they lit just fine. They kind of started burning, but then the wick burned through in the center, and both the wicks fell off onto the table. And this 1960s tablecloth was made of something that just loved fire. So all of a sudden, the whole family is running into the dining room. The table is aflame. Everything's on fire, completely burning. And we're going to try blowing it out. I ran into the kitchen, got the fire extinguisher, and I put the Thanksgiving table out. My family, for Christmas, my present that year was a pair of electronic candlesticks and a permanent ban on matches. The food was fine. The only thing that had burned up was the tablecloth and the table and some of the fancy dishware. And we had Thanksgiving at the kitchen table as we had every year. And it did feel really good to be together on that Thanksgiving. And since that time, I've come yet again to understand that the importance of that holiday is the gratitude we share with one another, the gratitude we share with all of the community around us, the gratitude we share for the food, and for the Thanksgivings to come. May they be more free. May they be more beautiful. I offer you a prayer, and I put it in the online order of service. That's a closing. We give thanks for many hands this day, hands that held us when we were born, hands that hold us when we first eat, first cry, first smile, hands that hold ours when we are small, crossing through dangers big and small, hands that build the rooms that shelter us as we grow, hands that point our ways to learning and love, hands that bind our vows when we marry, hands that steady us when we are old, and hands that carry us one last time when we die, and our lives are recalled with gratitude and memorial celebration. And many hands will bring to our table the food we will eat, beginning with the hands of the Wampanoag people and the other first Americans whose ancient knowledge becomes the food of Thanksgiving itself. And that food, from hands of farmers with seeds and plows, hands of laborers in fields and barns, hands brought to us because of the hands of workers building highways and homes, and the hands that made the food, beloved friends and family in our kitchens. And these hands, let us hold them together in prayer before we hold our nourishment and gratitude. For all of these hands here this morning, together on Thanksgiving, we give our thanks. And may all these hands always be reaching out for peace and for beauty. Okay, I sang this one in school too, Over the River and Through the Woods. I think we'll be all right.
Was originally a Thanksgiving song, not a Christmas song. You have to stand for the confessional.
Go in peace, be in peace, and may you know gratitude, and may that gratitude carry you to beautiful and lovely days to come.